when you know God got you. I enjoy the time that you are sharing with me today. Thank you for being here. It's a good song for us to think on, Dave. Made that smile thing with the kids fit right into, I thought, thinking about the universe. Well, today's message is conflict and faith. Last week it was laughable faith. But, you know, when you look to Abraham and Sarah, we think of as the father and mother of our faith. Abraham, the father of the faith of monotheism. There's a lot of conflict in faith. A lot of conflict in faith. And so if you come from one of those families that's completely absent of any conflict or difficulty, I'm very happy for you. But for the rest of us, we live with conflict. We live with difficulties, struggles, and maintaining faith through that. And for many of us, we find that faith even is strengthened through that conflict and through that struggle. Last week, we were celebrating the birth of Isaac. And remember how God had promised Abraham, he said, I'm going to give you descendants like the stars, a great nation, and what a blessing you're going to be. And I'm going to put this blessing on you, and you'll bless the whole world. And time goes on and on and on. And I don't know, maybe they were having trouble enjoying the passing of time, especially when it got to 90 and 99, and they were like, we still don't have that kid. And so earlier, they had decided, Sarah had decided, really, said, take my slave, Hagar, and have a child with her so we can have descendants through her. Just a side note, when I was reading these stories, I was thinking, you know, this was written from a guy's perspective, by the way. I wonder what Hagar's story would read like, being the slave girl. Anyhow, jump right back into it. So they have this child, and they have Ishmael, and they're so happy. And, you know, they have a descendant, and they think this is what they're going to have. And then last week we found out, no, the laughter comes when, you know, those three visitors come, and they tell them that you're going to have a baby at, 89 and 99. And okay, well, that causes us to laugh. And then he's born, and name him Laughter. Isaac is born. And then it says the story goes on, and Sarah now suddenly is looking out at her slave, Hagar, and Ishmael, and she's watching Ishmael, who's probably 10, 12 years old, playing with this little Isaac. And something within her rages, and she's filled with jealousy, and she thinks, I'm not giving this inheritance to this other kid. Now I have my kid. And welcome to life, conflict and jealousy and all those things that cause us to have difficulty and strife. And it's right there with the father of our faith and his family. And I guess the mothers of our faith as well. And so she tells Abraham, get her out of here. And him too. And again, I think the dad's perspective, it's written from a male perspective, it kind of lets Abraham off the hook. Saying, okay, well, you get out of here. It's Sarah. She said to. I'm not sure I buy all that, but that's what happens. And right from his own family, he creates a widow and an orphan, right? The two people that we're supposed to be caring for, those that are economically vulnerable. He creates a widow and an orphan right in his own family and sends them out into the desert with a little skin of water. So there you go. See ya. Well, they go, and, the desert's pretty cruel. It's not long before they're ready to die. And so she puts him down under a shrub, and he's a young kid. Puts him down under a shrub, and she goes a distance away because she just doesn't want to witness what she knows is going to happen. And then God comes. So God heard the cries of the child. God heard the cries of the oppressed in distress. And God's here to answer. And he says, I am going to make you a great nation. So Abraham's going to get two great nations, the Arabs and the Hebrews. And they're going to be a blessing to the world. They're going to be a blessing. Descendants like the stars. And so it says God opens her eyes, and boom, what? There's water. And they live. And it says that he goes on, says the same word that it says about Samuel and about Jesus. The boy grows in wisdom and stature. The kid grows up. And he grows out there in the desert. And he becomes really good with the bow. Quite a fierce guy. And he becomes the ultimate man's man. Or the kind of guy that looks a grizzly down. But this is with struggle, with conflict, and yet faith goes on. I personally finding it with my family, and I know you guys enough to know you deal with it in your families. Father's Day was kind of tough, thinking about my dad and the Alzheimer's unit and all of that stuff. So many of our loved ones are going through times of transition into care facilities or even into death and to the other side. And it's difficult. It's difficult. But we maintain faith, that gift of faith. And that faith, as we continue through it and deal with the difficulties that come, becomes strengthened. And then hopefully we get the gift of hindsight, because that's 2020. We can see how God was working through the whole time, even when we didn't know it. Well, I'm so happy to have the Frees here. And we got kind of a surprise meeting, I think in February, and I'll let you guys share a little bit about that, why they were suddenly flying through. And we were able to get them to stop in and share with you about the work they were doing in Mozambique. And I'm sure it's been a test of faith for them, and an experience with, hopefully, faith is continuing to grow. But I'd like to give you a moment or two to share about what you've been up to, and we're sure glad you're with us.
Talk about faith. I've got to hand it to Paul for inviting another preacher into the middle of his sermon. That takes faith and I think a little bit of guts. I could just run with whatever I want to right now.
Yeah.
I've got the reins. But when he told us what he was preaching about this morning, and conflict and faith, and asked us to share some of our own story, and began to think about the tie-in there, and realized, looking back in hindsight, our own experience with conflict and faith, and what we shared with you when we were here in February. A lot of what missionaries talk about and what we think about missionaries, we think about the faith part of that life and doing that type of ministry. We don't often talk about the conflict side of what you deal with as a missionary. Even from our very first arrival in Mozambique, and we experienced multiple different levels of conflict, not always in a negative sense or a dangerous sort of sense, really big conflict, but even as small as, we come in with a certain culture and a way of looking at things, and it often comes into conflict with the people that we're there to work with and our partners, and having to, part of relationship building is recognizing how your ideas and your faith and your culture conflicts with even people that you love and care about, sometimes in your own family, and people that become your family. And so from the very beginning of our experience in Mozambique, we had little conflicts coming up all the time, and working through those and deepening our relationship with our partners. And those were kind of the healthy types of conflict that we were dealing with. And then later on, after a few years, in a place like Mozambique, that's a place that's dealt with conflict for generations, from being subjugated under Portuguese as a colony, and then having, these are the big negative types of conflicts where people have guns and are fighting, and fighting for independence, and then they had conflict of fighting each other for control of this newly independent country. So they have this history of grand conflict in their country, and that we were learning about as we worked there, and recognizing that the conflict still lived in the people and the effect it had on them as we worked together, and then ultimately having it come really close to home in our final year there, and having to leave a year early, which was the surprise coming and being here with you. We would have come home around this time if our full term had been realized, but that generational conflict came back into play in the area that we lived in, and there were people fighting, walking around with guns, and that was part of the reason that it became an untenable situation for us. So there was a different, much more negative experience of conflict that a lot of missionaries also experience around the world, because we're called to be working with partners in places that aren't always safe. The reason that they need partners and need help and people with resources to come is because conflict is a draining thing. It takes a lot of energy to be in conflict and a lot of resources, and they need people to come in and help with that. And sometimes it creates situations where we can't be there, even though we'd like to be. And so we came back, and we were waiting there in a safe place for some time with friends in a different part of the country, and we're trying to rely on our faith to trust that something good is going to come out of us. We had a definite sense that God had us in a safe place. It wasn't always just our own faith. Faith happens in and within the context of community. A lot of times we felt pretty lost in the midst of that, and our faith, kind of like in Brother Dave's song, didn't always feel that present, but we didn't always have to rely on our own faith. It was the faith of the whole community, our partners and friends we'd made there, other missionaries, all of you praying for us, for our safety, and we knew that was happening, even though, so in the midst of sometimes our own discouragement, our faith was bolstered, and we didn't always have to rest on our individual faith. We had the faith of other people to rely on, which is, I think, one of the most important things we learned and had reinforced through that experience of dealing with such a negative conflict, and not being able to go back to our home, and knowing that there were people there we worked with that they couldn't just leave like we did. They had to have trust and faith that God was caring for them at the same time, just in different ways, and they were staying safe. Thankfully, with Facebook and the internet, which all of our friends there have, we're able to be in contact and know that they are, in fact, staying safe in those places. And so we go through all this process of conflict and feeling like losing faith, and then resting in other people's faith, and then getting ours back. And part of that conflict is not always knowing where you're going to end up. It's sometimes a really scary thing, and having to trust God and not always your own ability to get you where you're supposed to be. So we went through that whole transition process. One day we're in Mozambique waiting for things to calm down so we can go home. A few days later, we're landing in Portland, Oregon, and we're getting greeted by our regional ministers, not by most of our luggage, but by people we know and love that help us even deal with that conflict of lost luggage, which I'm sure some of you can relate to. But by that point, we were just kind of like rag dolls, Like I said, it takes so much energy to deal with some of that things, and you get in like maintenance mode. You're just kind of a zombie almost. And then you, through that transition process, and in the midst of community, our faith starts to come back to us, and we start doing the things we need to do to be involved in that process of finding where you're supposed to be. What's next, God? And we're asking, okay, So I can't be there. We can't be there. Where are we going now? And even as we were here visiting you in the winter, we were in that process of transitioning. We were telling the story of where we'd been and what we'd been doing, what God is doing through us and other people in a faraway place, and then also working on where God is calling us to next. And I was sending out searching call papers to different churches, and Kim was continuing her education at Oregon State University online, and I was sending greeting videos to churches from hotel room here in Anchorage. And the first morning we got here, I thought about doing it outside, but it was way too cold for that. So I sat there and was sending videos, and then as soon as we left here after our time visiting you all, and we're in the Seattle area, and received a call to our next place, the church in Kaiser, Oregon, Disciples Church, called me to be their minister, and we accepted, and that's where we landed for now, and we're feeling very bolstered in our faith and ensconced in community of faith. So in the same way, we're not always resting on our own faith, but in the midst of conflict, we hold our faith together in community. It's not just mine or Kim's or yours. The faith of the people is much bigger and stronger than the individual parts. It's a hopeful and gratifying thing to me, and I hope it is for all of you. And I know your church, even though we haven't seen each other a lot, has been an important part of that journey for us. And when we were here in the winter, we were like, we'd really like to come back. Our anniversary is coming up this summer, and it's 10 years for us, which is a huge deal. Having faith that we would actually stick together this long, and realizing that we spent 3 years kind of attached at the hip, and if that didn't fracture our relationship, nothing is going to. And so it's an exciting time for us, and we've been graciously hosted here, and we want to show our appreciation. And Kim has something that she would like to present all of you and a little story all about it.
So it's kind of funny, I think, that when you look back at conflict times in your life, hindsight is, they say hindsight is 20/20. You can look back and it's all clear. And let's say a year and 6 months ago, I thought our life was in a pretty rough spot, trying to get work done in Mozambique and be with our communities and just, trying to figure out what God was calling us to do. And you're like, God, I felt your calling, and we're here and we're doing your work, and why is it so hard, And then we got brought home, and I was really, really confused, and Eric was trying to figure it out with his papers, and I was finishing up an anthropology degree at Oregon State, and I was just like, all right, so we're here now, and this feels like where we're supposed to be, and you're having faith that you're still listening and following God's call. And when I looked back, after visiting you guys and doing our itineration, I looked back and now we're here now. And I thought, that was exactly where we were supposed to be. If we had still been in Mozambique trying to do something else there, all this last year would have been really, really, really hard. And I'm really happy I graduated last week. So I've got a summer job started for doing an anthropological dig. And Eric's settling in really well in Kaiser. We really, really do enjoy Kaiser, Oregon. We really have been enjoying our visit here with you guys. And last winter when we were here, I told someone that we'd been planning a vacation back up to Alaska, but I had started to look at booking places to stay and places to go and do, and I said, well, we could either get here or we could do stuff, one or the other. And, a whole bunch of you guys came up to and said, you know what? Get up here. You'll have places to stay and you'll have things to do. We really want you to come back. And this vacation for us has just been such a blessing and so fun, and I really have been enjoying Alaska. And I wanted to share a gift with you all. Our friend in Mozambique started making these for us because he said, "You missionaries are the only people who ever buy stuff from me." And I said, "Well, have you ever considered doing some of your art that depicts Christian scenes?" He's like, "No, what do you want it to look like?" And I said, "Well, just think about different Bible stories, and in your own mind, however you feel like it looks, put it down." And this is called batik. It's made with wax in natural dyes, so keep it out of the sun. But he makes these artworks here. His name's Domingo, and this is depicting Pentecost. So I know it's just passed, so you'll have to put this up again next year. But I wanted to present you guys with this thank you for just helping to make our transition when we were here in the winter and when we were here again this summer, and just really helping to bless our lives and just, really allowing us to recharge our batteries. We really appreciate all you've done for us. So thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome. And I've got an idea with this, a different one I just thought of. I'll put it right here.
And so just thank you very much, and I really hope that people can enjoy this, and I have a feeling we'll be back, so we'll see. Maybe we need to round out the year and come in the fall and maybe a spring as well. So thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And that fit really well, I think, with our theme today. The Matthew text basically talks about how difficult it's going to be to proclaim the gospel in the world. And there are a bunch of gatherings of sayings of Jesus, and it's just one after another on how much trouble they're going to have, how much conflict they're going to have, and how the gospel's not going to be all that easily received by the world. And so I thought that text worked real well also. The one thing, though, with this Pentecost banner that she brought us is Jesus is establishing something to make this reign of God real here on earth. And it's this community of faith, this community that's empowered by God, by the Spirit of God. And it's a community that's a global community. From Mozambique to Anchorage, Alaska, to Kaiser, to name a place, the reign of God is going to happen. And we have faith that it will happen amidst all the conflict that comes along the way. And so we celebrate that God has given us community. And the great thing of community, they were mentioning, when your faith is struggling, and when your faith is waning, it's very important that we have a group of people who can come and gather with and strengthen our faith. And then we can do the same for them at different points in their lives as well. And so we thank God for this church, the community of faith. And I love that Eyes on the Sparrow song. And I was talking about, struggles with our family and thinking of my mom and my dad. And, I called my mom. I had to text my sister after I talked to my mom this morning. I said, just give you a heads up, I already made Mom cry today. I didn't mean to, but I was mentioning His Eyes on the Sparrow, and it was one of my dad's favorite songs to sing. And she said, I'm going to take that music in with him, and he'll sing it today if he's having a good day. And I'm hoping that he does this afternoon. But how important it is to have a faith community to strengthen us through difficult times in life. And what a joy it is to be a part of this one. It really is a family, and the family of God. And so thank you for your time with us here today. And may God help us as we seek to continue to usher the kingdom of heaven into earth and onto earth in this time and in this place. God help us as we go through conflict. And God help us with our faith that it might be strengthened. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.